Ina mana, ina reo, e rau rangatira mā, tēnā koutou katoa. Greetings to you all. I acknowledge all the wisdom, all the voices, and all the leadership here today. The digital sphere is increasingly where we are living our lives, especially for our young people. It is where we connect with others, socially, professionally, and for many, spiritually and politically too. It must be an inclusive space that works for all of us as a force for social change, economic progress, and for individuals of all backgrounds. Multi-stakeholder models are key to good digital governance. We need everyone at the table. We must work together to build up the goods and manage the bads. A good example is the Christchurch call, which seeks to address extremist content online. I'm incredibly proud of our partnership with France on this. Ethnical and human-centred artificial intelligence is vital and is addressed by the call. Earlier this year, the Christchurch Call's second anniversary summit, leaders endorsed an ambitious work program with a core focus on users' journeys. We also focused on the need for better transparency reporting, further improving crisis response, and curating a self-sustaining community. Ethnical AI principles underpin Aotearoa New Zealand's membership of the Global Partnership for Artificial Intelligence. And thank you again, France and Canada, for your leadership in this space. Diverse communities and marginalised groups need to be in the room. Young people need to be there. Everyone needs a say in how we shape the digital landscape, since this is increasingly where we're living our lives. Now more than ever, effective governance and collective will is needed to make the digital sphere a net positive force in the world. As we would say in New Zealand, he waka eka noa. We are all travelling on this journey together.
Hello, and thank you, Prime Minister Ardern, for those remarks. Thank you for the invitation to speak with you today. My name is Courtney RADSCH. I'm a journalist, a scholar, and a free expression advocate who focuses on the nexus of media, technology, and human rights. And I am also a member of the Christchurch Call Advisory Network, which is a really important part of the Christchurch Call. And as you heard Prime Minister Ardern allude to progress that has been made. I'm also the technology strategist for the Global Fund for Media Development and senior U.S. tech advisor for Article 19. And today I'm going to be leading our conversation with a distinguished panel of experts who will join me today, who are involved intimately in the work of the Christchurch Call, including the Ambassador for Digital Affairs, Henri VERDIER from France, Farzaneh BADIEI, who is the newly appointed co-chair of the Christchurch Call Advisory Network, Nick PICKLES from Twitter, who is the chair of the Global Internet Forum for Counterterrorism this year, and Courtney GRÉGOIRE from Microsoft, who heads up their work with the Christchurch Call. Before we get into the conversation, I just want to kind of set the scene a little bit. So, as you know, there was a summit earlier this year where France and New Zealand agreed to strengthen the involvement of the Christchurch Call's supporters. And they also saw broad, high-level political mobilization for the call and the announcement of new endorsements, including from the United States, Tunisia, Peru, Czech Republic, Estonia, Slovakia, and Croatia. And this is, this peace forum is a prime opportunity to invite these countries to re-engage, to up their engagement, and to really figure out how do we use this new mechanism that came out of tragedy to deal with the very real threat of terrorism and violent extremism that is propagated, fueled, and recruited online, while not undermining civil liberties, human rights, freedom of expression, and privacy. So I want to talk about some of the progress that has been made over the past few months and over the months since the last call. And then we're going to get into a conversation so we can dig into some of the details. The action plan, one of the outcomes since the last forum was the adoption of action plans that were defined by all the supporters to strengthen the call community. Also, to improve the crisis protocols, to work on transparency algorithms and the technical development of new tools to combat the scourge of terrorism and violent extremism online. It was also focused on maintaining an open dialogue with platforms, as well as the codification of the Christchurch Call Advisory Network through a terms of reference, through funding of the advisory network which was recently announced by New Zealand and France, which have agreed to fund the Secretariat, and recognition that coordination needs financial support is really important because it's very hard to have the multi-stakeholder engagement that Prime Minister Ardern referred to a moment ago without the funding to make that possible. And this idea of multi-stakeholderism is really central to the Christchurch Call. And it's not unique. It's actually now a minimal expectation in the realm of content governance. And so it requires work and attention to power dynamics. And I think that we're also seeing how the call is related in many ways to other fora and this polycentric notion of how we're addressing these issues through the Global Internet Forum for Counterterrorism, which you'll probably hear referred to as the GIFCT over the next while, as well as the OECD so-called TVEC process, where they are coming up with minimal standards for reporting on terrorist and violent extremism content. All of these efforts are seeking to involve different stakeholder groups in different ways and have different governance mechanisms. But one of the common theme across these efforts is the importance of multi-stakeholder initiatives. Now, work remains to be done on algorithmic amplification, but there are working groups on this because obviously it plays an important role in the radicalization journey process, and we're going to delve into that. We're also going to hear about the development of innovative tools to fight against the dissemination of terrorist content. And we want to talk about the crisis protocols, the crisis incident protocol, some of the exercises that have been done on that recently, and what we can learn from that. So I believe that I should be turning to the ambassador who I see has joined us. And Ambassador Verdier, I'd like to invite you to begin and tell us a little bit about the progress that has been achieved and specifically the work that's being done through the GIFCT with the working groups. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Courtney, and thank you for this model of introduction. Sorry, maybe I have to speak French because if I don't speak French, I have the translation in my screen.
I am unable to hear the ambassador at the moment.
Donc je vais parler français.
While we figure out what is happening technically with his, with him, let me turn to Farzaneh BADIEI, who is the one of the civil society co-chairs of the Christchurch Call Advisory Network. And I'm going to shake it up because I know usually we start with government, we go to private sector, and then we leave civil society for last. But I'm going to give you the first kind of word here, Farzaneh. I want to hear from you what you think has been really the progress over the past year. We've been involved, since the outset in this initiative. What are you seeing as give us what have you seen as the progress over the past year?
I can give you a very simple example. We witnessed a significant improvement in the inclusion of civil society in the Christchurch. Basically, in the beginning of the process, the governments and tech corporations had roundtables while we were watching from the audience, and they were actually talking about how they can include civil society. But today, a government representative actually stepped down to share the platform with civil society, with us, so that we can also be on equal footing and discuss matters with other stakeholders. So it was a rocky start, but we are now on a multi-stakeholder path, and the call community is building the multi-stakeholder structure that any member could use to raise an online governance issue related to terrorist content. And the New Zealand and French government aim for these groups to become more autonomous, and they have helped enormously to bring the key actors and decision makers to the discussion. Obviously, it is not always with ease, joy, and glory. We need to be mindful of the risk of being co-opted by other actors and turning into a multi-stakeholder rubber stamp that legitimizes other actors' action. And also, we need to be mindful that the Christchurch Call commitments were actually the texts were drafted by tech corporation and the government without the participation of the civil society. But now we need to be involved with every step of the implementation, and we actually see that we are like the government engaging with us. They have their various means of communication and channels of communication that we can discuss these things. And the last thing is that including civil society is a way to differentiate a democratic mindset from an authoritarian mindset and how to govern the internet. Otherwise, governments have pretty much the same tools in their toolbox to govern the internet. But by including the civil society, they can bring that democratic notion to the governance. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you for that. I think that's really critical because, of course, you saw that this is an initiative that was launched by two democracies, and that, you know, how this collaboration and this effort to, you know, as Prime Minister Ardern has put it in the past, eradicate terrorism and violent extremism online can be a very scary thing, or it can be a very collaborative effort. And I think that it will have legitimacy by including civil society. But we've actually seen, I think, as you said, a lot of progress over the past year. And I want to hopefully turn now to Ambassador Verdier and see if his microphone is looking so that we can hear more broadly about some of the progress that has been made over the past year with respect to the call and its work with the GIFT-CT.
Voilà, je vais donc parler français.
So I will be speaking French. Thank you for this invitation. Thank you for the introduction, Courtney. You know, yesterday, the President of the French Republic and Prime Minister Ardern, in the presence of Vice President Kamala Harris and Ursula von der Leyen and several heads of states and governments, clearly said that they believe that what we are doing is important, both in its form and its method. Faced with the numerous questions that are confronting our democracies because of the development of digital resources, social media, the internet, the web, this multilateral stakeholder situation is a very demanding environment with regard to relations between the governments, research, the private sector, civil society. So there's not one single response to the many issues that are raised. And no one body can resolve these issues. If the state decided alone to decide what is terrorist content, if private companies decided what artificial intelligence should be used for on their own, that would be a problem. The Christchurch call goes very far in the direction of bringing people together. The same thing for the Paris call for the security in cyberspace, the Global Partnership for Artificial Intelligence. All of these multilateral partnerships are, in our opinion, the best way to move forward with regard to the digital environment. And the issues that we're looking at in the Christchurch call, as I have said several times, this have to do with the terrorist images, terrorist videos that are available on internet. It's not just images of a terrorist action. That's just part of the terrorist action. When the Christchurch terrorist planned his attack, he also planned it. He planned the buzz on the social network. He went off with his GoPro. When Samuel Paty, a French professor, was killed, the his assassin stopped immediately to film the images, the terrible images, and in the hope of putting them on social media. So we need to prevent such images from fomenting terrorist action. Not only the images of actions themselves, but images that foment or encourage terrorist actions. I've been pleased to see the Christchurch call grow. There are now 50 stakeholders. There are a dozen major digital platforms that are now partners in the Christchurch call. Indeed, civil society has a serious demand with regard to moderation and control of media. You know, civil servants are paid to do this work. It's our job. We're able to do this work. And as civil society is right to ask for the means to participate in this work. Because it is, as I said, a multi-stakeholder initiative. Now we're at the second anniversary of the Christchurch attack. And we have opened some new working groups on new questions that are very important. And we've had some very long discussions on the questions of the effects of algorithms on radicalization. And there is some serious research that is now underway to try to understand how algorithms can affect radicalization. That is just one aspect of the Christchurch Call's group work. So I think it is time to be proactive and to act defensively and to look at some of these big issues that require a lot of work and a lot of knowledge. So that's the introduction that I would like to make, and I think we'll be coming back to all these questions in our debate.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for that. I think you hit on several key points, including some of the priorities for the coming year, which include algorithmic transparency, understanding, and transparency more broadly. But I want to turn now to Nick Pickles from Twitter, because the Global Internet Forum for Countering Terrorism, the GIFCT, is a really important partner in the Christchurch call, because it's essentially the mechanism for implementing a lot of the partnership and collaboration and joint work between companies and government to actually address this issue at its heart, and is, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, is the kind of leading the crisis incident protocol design. So I'd love to hear from you. How do you work? What is the relationship between the Christchurch call and the GIFCT, and what are GIFCT's objectives for this coming year?
Well, thank you, Courtney, and thank you to the French and New Zealand government for hosting this incredibly important conversation. As you say, Twitter is the chair of GIFCT's operating board this year. And a reminder that when Twitter became chair, that this is the first year that GIFCT has had a full-time staff in place for the full year. So huge challenges and huge work to be done for a very young organization. So as chair of the operating board this year, I think something to reinforce from the Prime Minister's remarks to the Ambassador's remarks and the comments we've heard, multi-stakeholderism is key to the progress that GIFCT makes. At the beginning of this year, we set out a number of priorities, critically setting GIFCT up for long-term success with strong governance, strong multi-stakeholder input, and strategic groundings. We needed to strengthen the crisis response protocols, which we've already heard from, to broaden GIFCT's membership. This space is something that is challenging. It covers hundreds of platforms. We need to make sure that GIFCT's impact is broadened across a wide range of industry. And also, we need to widen that impact across different forms and different ideologies of terrorism. We also need to recognize that the kind of materials, as the Ambassador was just touching, it's not just photographs and videos. We need to broaden GIFCT's technical response. And I think we've made progress on all of those fronts. There's certainly work still to be done, and as we hand over to Google at the end of this year, I'm sure there's many areas that they will still want to prioritize, but we've developed a new content awareness protocol, which works alongside the content incident protocol to ensure that the information is being shared between companies, even in situations where a content incident hasn't been declared. We've made big progress growing the membership. At the end of 2019, there were 9 member companies. There's now 17, with a growing pipeline of more companies looking to join from different sectors. We've expanded the hash database, which is the technical signals that we share, to include manifestos. Again, not just videos, but actually broadening out to those. And we're also looking at things like how GIFCT now implements the outcomes of its first human rights impact assessment. Something I think that's an incredibly important part of building trust in GIFCT's long-term work. And we also have products from 5 working groups published, looking at a range of issues from algorithms to transparency, legal frameworks, content incident protocols, and how we're actually going to build the technology we need. So all of that work is public. And I think an incredibly important part of GIFCT's work is being transparent so people can see what we're doing. And I think it's important just to put on record thanks to the GIFCT team who work incredibly hard on all these projects, the French and New Zealand governments who've led the support for GIFCT and actually enabled that kind of multi-stakeholder conversation. So when the things that governments need to lead through the Christchurch call, governments can lead, industry can support, but those things that industry needs to lead through GIFCT, government is engaged and civil society is engaged. And so thank you to the people who've participated in working groups, the members of the Independent Advisory Committee, and all the people who've contributed to GIFCT's work. It makes a huge difference to driving progress on this challenge. There's more to come, but I think we can be proud of the work that we've achieved this year.
Thanks, Nick. And thank you also for mentioning the human rights impact assessment. I think that was an important development that happened over the past year at the GIFCT, but that was very inclusive of the Christchurch Call community and the advisory network in particular. And I definitely want to get back to that. But before that, I'd like to go to Courtney GRÉGOIRE, who's the Chief Digital Security Officer at Microsoft, to understand a little bit more about what this means for you as a company, how Microsoft engages in the Christchurch Call, and specifically, talk about how are you working to fight terrorism online. Nick mentioned the hash database, which is essentially a database of so-called digital fingerprints that refer to content that is, held on various platforms or circulating in order to prevent its further spread. How does that really work, and what are you doing to ensure that other human rights, that protected content like news content, satire, counter narratives, etc., aren't negatively impacted by this effort to counter violent extremism online?
Yes, well, thank you, Courtney, and I should say bonjour from Paris here. I want to first acknowledge particularly the French and New Zealand governments for bringing us together for this important conversation. Courtney, I think there are a couple themes that pull through, both from last night's opening session here in Paris to why the work that we are talking about today is so critically important. I actually just reflect on the opening remarks from Vice President Harris, President Macron, and other heads of state, and I honestly think the Christchurch call to action was one of the most common themes discussed yesterday. Microsoft is a 46-year-old technology company, and our longstanding commitment to empowering every person and organization on the planet to achieve more through technology is what inspired our early engagement and commitment to the Christchurch call to action. And I think thematically, we've heard a lot about multi-stakeholderism, but I want to acknowledge one critical element underscoring all of that work. I do think what happened with the Christchurch call and the work we've pulled through to the Global Internet Forum on Counterterrorism is a new model that breaks new ground for where we should aspire to true multi-stakeholderism. It's grounded in clear objectives with defined commitments, and then it builds spaces for dialogue that previously did not exist. I think it's fair to say that as sectors, we don't always agree on the approaches to our core objective of eradicating terrorist and violent extremism online. But if we build the trusted community to have those conversations, we're better for it. The second theme, I think, is this bias for action. And that was embedded in a couple moments of progress. We talked about the content incident protocol. Microsoft was proud to create the original architecture of a defined content incident protocol, narrowly tailored to the riskiest moments from a real-world violent attack with the attempt to go viral online. What we have learned, as reflected by Nick, is we should embed progress, embed action, and then learn from it. And so as we've learned the lessons from the content incident protocol, we move to a broader awareness framework and expand how we think about these issues. I think that is the bias for action we reflect in the working groups to expand our work on algorithmic outcomes in the future. Courtney, you mentioned how does technology companies think about the specific tools, and I want to acknowledge the last piece that we've really committed to from a stakeholder perspective, and that is expanding and broadening the community through the tools and unique opportunities the GIFT-CT can provide. We've expanded the range of technology platforms with a real commitment to empowering smaller platforms to have the tools at their disposal to meaningfully meet their commitments to address these issues. And the hash database reflects just one of those elements. I think it's important to note that is a tool that is provided meaningfully to action terrorist and violent extremist content. The decision on how to moderate that content is taken by individual platforms and services. So for a company like Microsoft, who has a wide range of products and services, from gaming to LinkedIn to consumer productivity, it means thinking in a narrowly tailored way how we reflect our commitment unique to the qualities of each product. And that is a risk-based assessment that has to be thought of with the commitments to human rights that we take. If we think about the progress we need, it is to expand the global reach of those tech companies that can come into the fold. And I think as we learn and continue to build on the bias for action, it'll be about continual improvement for those steps.
Thank you. Can I want to also remind those watching that there is an opportunity to ask questions, so do please put those in, and I'll be keeping an eye on the Q&A to integrate those throughout. But Courtney, before I kind of let you off, you mentioned this bias for action. Is that the same thing as move fast and break things?
I do not think so, in the spirit of the Christchurch call, Courtney. And I say that because the bias for action through the Christchurch call is embedded in the multi-stakeholder work. So how do we make sure we are taking our commitments seriously to move forward to address the horrific challenge of terrorism and violent extremism content online and continually learn? I think we often shorthand this as the Christchurch call. I want to be clear, it was an intentional Christchurch call to action. And what I think action has moved to is progress. Progress with the commitment to continual improvement and an open dialogue for all voices to pressure. Is the actions that we're taking the right actions, and how do we learn? It goes to why core to the work at the Global Internet Forum on Counterterrorism is to invest in research-based approaches, to bring other voices of research through the Global Network on Extremism Technology into how we do our work. That's research-informed, continual progress. That's multi-stakeholderism action.
Thank you, Courtney. Farzaneh, I want to go back to you to kind of follow up on some of what we've heard from Courtney and Nick and Ambassador around the need for dialogue and the structures that have been set up here, and this emphasis on research, because of course you are an academic by background, and you've done extensive research both on kind of governance models as well as issues around content moderation. Talk to us about the dialogue. What does that look like in practice? And can you talk a bit about the work that these working groups are doing? And what do you see as some of the most important progress that has been made? You know, if we want to, there are lots of critiques, but I think that if we take we can also take a step back and think about, okay, well, as Courtney said, there's been progress made. So from your perspective, can you address that?
Yes, of course. So process-wise, the GIFCT, like any other multi-stakeholder organization, in the beginning had challenges to include others and, to have like processes for membership, and the challenges still exist. So it is great that we want to have a multi-stakeholder environment, but we are not, at least in my opinion, we are not there yet. And the composition of the working groups might not be optimal. And also, like governance-wise, they have like an independent advisory committee, as Nick mentioned, that we hope to see that will have like a more effective role in operationalizing the multi-stakeholder process as well. But for the working groups I have attended, and I have observed that a lot of the concerns that civil society raises actually more or less get implemented. For example, in the crisis response protocol, we have mentions of observing human rights, and also we have like transparency paragraphs. From the research perspective, unfortunately, we are still at the this kind of primitive way of looking at the problem of terrorism online, because we look at it from the content and we don't look at it from the humans. So we miss out on despite the fact that there are mentions of it, but we need to like see more research about, like, from social scientists, from political scientists, to that how we can actually combat this kind of behavior online instead of just combating the content. And yeah, that's it.
Thank you. I think that's an interesting point, kind of looking at this behaviorally versus content-wise. Ambassador Verdier, I'd like to ask you to come in here, because of course France has been the site of and experienced several terrorist attacks. How do you see? You've talked about progress. Can you talk about what does this actually mean in practice? How is this changing the dynamics of terrorism from your perspective in France?
Well, it's not the most multi-stakeholder subject, but it's substantial. Unfortunately, we've had many attacks within the community, Christchurch community in France, in Germany, in the United States, and this has enabled us to improve the crisis protocol. During the attack, at the moment of the attack, we don't know how many accomplices there are. If there are going to be other videos on other channels, we have to make decisions very fast, and we can weaken the impact of the terrorist attack by removing the content. But security forces need help, and they need to know if other things are in the pipeline. We need to wipe out, but also leave enough for the work for the security forces. And the Christchurch call to action developed a crisis protocol. For some situations, it's very adapted. For others, it's not adapted, and it's certified with other crisis protocols, such as Interpol and so on. And this is very important work. It's very technical, and it requires very fine-tuned consultation between the platforms and the authorities. But it's essential, and it's essential for in regard to civil society, because we all understand that if states and companies agree to sort out a crisis situation, they may have the tendency to go too fast, or maybe not follow all of the rules that are prevalent in the state of, in a state of law. Now, within the various working groups we have had, I really enjoy or really like the work that's done within the Christchurch call to action on positive action. Everyone knows that we shouldn't leave the monopoly of the floor to terrorists on social networks, and we all understand this is important. And we also understand that we mustn't become asymmetrical or go into systems where we are doing counter-propaganda, because it's not good, but it's not efficient. We can't convince terrorists that they are wrong just by showing them photographs of happy children running around in the forest, for example. So we need to understand what's happening. We need to understand how they become radicalized, and we need to understand what's happening from a cognitive point of view. You need to understand the words that can lead to peace and bring people back to their state of humanity, and understanding that some people don't think the same way as them, that things are more complex than that. So that's how civil society clearly can teach us we who are in the governance positions. Those are two examples that are on a sort of, list of possibilities. Now, we also need to look at civil society with the government, and then, of course, other subjects are important. But I would, of course, like to leave the floor for my colleagues to say what they have to say about this as well. Thank you.
Definitely covered the importance of multi-stakeholderism. But I do want to get into some of the specifics. I mean, the Christchurch call ultimately came out of this idea that governments and companies can coordinate to stave the spread of terrorism. So, Nick, can you talk to us about, what have you learned over the past year? Like, does this make a difference? We've heard reference to progress, but can you talk to us about this? Like, what does this actually look like? And, I know there was a tabletop exercise with Europol recently. I don't know if you were part of that, but, how does this actually, the core of this, which is in part about preventing the spread and virality of this content, talk to us a little bit more about the specifics of progress and what does that really mean?
Sure, and I think this is a really important part of the impact that GIFCT has. So since 2019, as Courtney said, when we established the Content Incident Protocol, GIFCT has tracked more than 150 incidents, and only on 2 occasions has triggered the full Content Incident Protocol. And one of the challenges that we found was that there was essentially 2 stages. There was business as usual, and then Content Incident Protocol. And actually, and I think the ambassador's phrase of fine-tuning is exactly right. The gap in the middle was very clearly identified, I think, after the attack in Conflans, and a recognition that industry needs more granular ways of working. So, as the ambassador said, one of the areas may be situational awareness sharing. Industry sees one side of the picture, security services see a different side. And by sharing understanding and information, it can ensure that the industry response moves quickly and focuses on the right threats. It means that governments can focus on where they need legal process for different things. They can focus on that, knowing that the content is being monitored and addressed. And then also, as the threat evolves, and I think the thing that we are all acutely aware of is you never know when an incident is happening if it is the end of the incident. There could be other attackers, there could be other content, and as the ambassador said, attackers planning the distribution of content. And so really for us, it's the no one company tackling this issue on their own. It's about the combined expertise and the combined technology of all of GIFCT's members collaborating with government and with civil society and with academia, so that in an incident of a crisis, everybody has as much information as is available to move quickly, to disrupt terrorist content, and also to then enable other parts, I think this is really critical, to not have too many different processes in one process. I think because what's really dangerous is if you overload a process, it can actually become too bureaucratic and move slowly. And I think the real lesson we've had from the content incident protocol is to focus it where it is most needed, which is stopping the spread of terrorist content online after a terrorist event. And that's where I think there is more progress, and then there's more fine-tuning, particularly relating to the integration of a Europol process, the Christchurch call process, the GIFCT process, and more emerging governmental processes. And then asking the hard questions of how do we bring civil society into that process? How can we be transparent about what's happening to make sure that that process is trusted and effective? That's a lot of work, and it's certainly not going to be done this year. And just to pick up on the point about the GIFCT Independent Advisory Committee, I couldn't agree more. And I think a priority for Twitter in the remaining time as our term as chair is strengthening that governance to make sure that multi-stakeholderism is really a core part of GIFCT going forward.
Thank you. Courtney, in the couple of minutes that we have left, I'd like to hear from you. What has this meant in practice for Microsoft? And, I think if I remember correctly, Microsoft also developed the approach to eradicating child sexual abuse online as well. And I think there are, some parallels here. And I guess a couple of questions. One is, do you ever learn from these two different processes to really address these horrific things that have this digital component? Second, Microsoft is a very large company. Talk to us about how this has affected you internally, but also where does the Christchurch call need to go with respect to incorporating smaller platforms and platforms that might not have the same expressed commitment to human rights or have any interest in engaging in these issues because they want to be, the alternative platform or whatever it may be?
Yeah, Courtney, great question. And one theme I think worth picking up, because we've covered, I hope, some of the critical tools in the toolbox we've built through the Christchurch call and the Global Internet Forum for smaller platforms to understand the value of coming in to the community. The hash database of known identified terrorist content is one of those usable, actionable items that a smaller platform can meaningfully think about. How do we address terrorist content on our platforms? The content incident protocol and now the broader framework, if smaller platforms come in, will help them understand the broader context and an ability to think about these issues in an actionable way. But one element that we haven't had as much time to talk about is that critical prevention pillar that comes through the themes with both Christchurch Call and the Global Internet Forum. And the way that we need to think about research, and I loved the previous comment, how we think about research not from a content base, from a human base, is some of the lessons we had to learn hard from child exploitation in other areas. Because the unique ability to prevent means you need to have that research and understanding. What are the points of intervention online that are meaningful to change behavior? The Institute for Strategic Dialogue, for example, has been a critical partner with Microsoft and the Global Internet Forum on Counterterrorism to help us understand on our Bing environment, what is a moment to share a counter narrative that will have meaningful impact? You asked for action, or I should say, key performance indicators of progress. One key performance indicator for us is the click-through rate, when someone actually takes advantage of looking at a counter narrative that is research-based and may have an opportunity to expand their thinking away from a radicalization moment to an inclusive moment. We know we have to get better. As Ambassador Verdier said, it has to be research-based, what actually changes the thinking and expands the thinking. But what we know at Microsoft, as we reflect on what those intervention moments, they're very different based on what the design of a product or service is, how a user comes and engages on that platform. So how we think about this for LinkedIn is different than the Xbox community, is different from our Bing environment. And we hope to be able to bring that thinking as a smaller platform comes into the GIFCT community or the Christchurch community. How do you understand that moment of design, the best opportunity to really effectuate the commitments and bring them into the fold? You talked about how do we convince someone who may not be thinking about this? And I think we often talk about the carrot or the stick. We hope that the GIFT CT has created many of those carrots, the tools, the basic tools in the toolbox. But we need a broader community here, particularly governments and civil society, to acknowledge that platforms have a responsibility to engage in this dialogue. They are creating spaces of public discussion. They need to be at the table, and we want to be able to find some of those tools as to how they can meaningfully action when they come in.
Great. Well, thank you for that. And I think, you really hit on something. For all of the challenges that remain, the fact is that there are government, private company dialogues that include civil society. And I don't think that we see the same approaches from companies that are based in countries without a tradition of democratic inclusion. And so, I think, let's put it out there. We don't see certain, companies from Russia, from China, from Iran engaging in this type of dialogue. So for all of the challenges that remain, it's heartening to hear about the progress that has been made. I would like to thank our panelists and the audience for taking this time at the Paris Peace Forum to talk about this important endeavor. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much, and we'll see you soon.